Imagine standing in the biting frost of an English market square, a rope tied tight around your neck, while a crowd of strangers stares as though you were livestock. Your husband's voice cuts through the morning air. What am I bid for this woman? Asterisk in the year 1830, this was not a crime. It was your only chance at freedom. Section 1. The bells of St. Martin's had only just finished their mournful toll when you found yourself standing in the biting air of the Yorkshire morning. The year was 1832, and the market square of Bridworth bustled with the usual noise of a Thursday fair, cattle shifting uneasily in their pens, sellers shouting over one another, the clink of coins changing hands. Yet today, the murmurs carried a sharper edge, a tone that made your chest tighten and your breath catch in your throat. The cobblestones beneath your boots glistened with frost. Every exhale formed a pale cloud that vanished as quickly as it appeared. You tried to steady yourself, but the rope digging into your neck kept reminding you of what was about to unfold. The halter was coarse, the sort used for leading stubborn mares, and every time you shifted, it rubbed the skin raw. Your husband, Samuel Pike, gripped the other end with the firm authority of a man used to working plow horses. His calloused hands were blackened with dirt that never seemed to wash out, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the square with unsettling ease. "What am I bid for this woman?" Samuel cried, his words slurred from ale. He had been drinking since dawn, you knew, drinking to summon the courage to do what many in Bridworth whispered he had threatened for months. A strong back, good cook, and temperate disposition. Fit to keep a house in order. Who'll start the bidding? A ripple went through the crowd. Faces leaned forward. Butchers with their blood-stained aprons, farmers smelling of hay, apprentices who had come to gawk as if this were theatre. Some smirked, some frowned, others studied you with open calculation. Their eyes moved the way they did when choosing a mule, looking at your hands to see if they were rough enough for labor, studying your figure for childbearing promise, lingering on your mouth and teeth as if testing for soundness. You clenched your jaw, holding back the bow that threatened to rise. You were 26, with a body bent from years of laundry work, and a face weathered from cold winds that swept mercilessly across the moors. But inside, you felt something that none of them could see, the dangerous, flickering hope that this humiliating charade might lead you somewhere else, anywhere else, than the misery of Samuel Pike's home. Samuel yanked the rope sharply. "Look at her teeth!" he shouted, gripping your chin with his grimy hand and forcing your lips open. Laughter rippled through the crowd. A butcher's boy whistled. An older man spat into the dirt, muttering, "Shameful business." But he did not leave. None of them left. They wanted to see it through. Your heart thudded against your ribs. You knew what this meant. This wasn't a crime. Not in Bridworth. Not in half of England. No constable would stop Samuel. No priest would shield you. The halter around your neck was not just a rope. It was your last hope at a freedom the law denied you. Section 2. The murmurs swelled into something like bidding. A man in a patched brown coat, his face ruddy from years of wind and whiskey, called out, "A shilling to start!" The words were half jest, half serious, and the crowd gave a low chuckle, the kind reserved for markets when a man tried to undersell an ox. Samuel sneered. "A shilling? You'd not buy a lame goat for a shilling. This here's a woman sound of limb and of good stock. No shrew, no brawler." He looked at you with a crooked smile, knowing well how often he had forced you silent with his fists. "Who'll give me more?" Two farmers elbowed forward. One, a stout fellow with straw in his beard, circled you like a horse trader at an auction. He grunted and reached for your hand, turning it over to inspect your palms. Your fingers were cracked from scrubbing, reddened from boiling water, and scarred from the small burns of the hearth. He nodded approvingly. "She'll work. Knows her way round a washtub. 2 shillings. The other, a younger man with anxious eyes, called out quickly, "Half a crown." His voice trembled, and it made the crowd laugh again. He flushed crimson but stood his ground. Samuel's face lit with greed. "Now we're getting somewhere. Half a crown, then. Who'll best that?" You stared hard at the young man. You recognized him. Thomas Hargreaves, the cooper's son, He'd watched you at the well sometimes, offering shy greetings, never daring more while Samuel glowered from the doorway. You felt your chest tighten. Was it possible he had come today for you? But before hope could take root, another voice cut through. 3 shillings! Shouted a broad-shouldered blacksmith, his apron still powdered with soot. He stepped forward, eyes cold and assessing. She'll bear children well enough. I'll give 3. Samuel tugged the rope, forcing you to turn toward the smith as if displaying you better. 3 shillings it is, he bellowed. Who's got more? The crowd pressed closer. Boots scraped the frost. A boy climbed atop a cart for a better view. You could feel the heat of their gazes crawling over your skin, and every muscle in your body screamed to run. But the halter tethered you. The law tethered you. The whole damned weight of England tethered you. And then, as the blacksmith moved nearer, you heard a voice. A steady, low call from the back of the crowd. 4 shillings! Your head snapped up. The crowd parted slightly, and you saw him, Richard Hale, the widower who had spoken to you in whispers when you brought washing to his cottage. A man with gentler eyes than most, who once pressed a loaf into your hands when Samuel had spent the last of your coin on ale. His jaw was set now, but his gaze never wavered from you. The crowd murmured in interest. A contest. Samuel's mouth curled into a grin. His grip on the rope tightened as if he alone controlled the outcome. 4 shillings! That's good money. Who'll give me 5? The blacksmith scowled, spitting into the frost. The young cooper's son fidgeted, his lips parting as if he might speak, then shutting again. You held your breath. The air was alive with tension, and you felt it deep in your bones. The next words spoken in that square would decide the course of your life. Section 3. 5 shillings. The blacksmith barked suddenly, his voice like the clang of his own hammer. The crowd shifted, murmuring approval. He had the money, that much was clear. His forge did well enough, and his arms were thick with the muscle of his trade. To many gathered there, it seemed a fair match, a strong man, a hard-working woman. Practical. But you felt your stomach twist into a knot. You had seen the blacksmith before, Edmund Cole, they called him, at the tavern on nights when Samuel staggered home late. He was a loud drinker, a man whose laugh turned to curses once the ale soured in his belly. You could imagine his fists, heavier even than Samuel's, and the thought chilled your blood more than the morning frost ever could. Richard Hale spoke again, steady and calm. 6 shillings. He pushed through the crowd now, his coin purse in hand, his eyes never leaving yours. For the briefest second, you felt air return to your lungs. Samuel tugged at the rope, jerking you like a mule to display you better. 6 shillings! Who'll give 7? The cooper's son, Thomas, shifted nervously, then blurted. 7! 7, and I'll throw in a cartwheel for your trouble, Mr. Pike. The crowd roared with laughter. A cartwheel was no fortune, but the boy's earnestness amused them. Samuel's grin grew wider. Your pulse hammered. This was spiraling beyond what you or Richard had planned. The bidding was no longer a simple performance of legitimacy. It was turning into a contest of pride. 8. Richard said firmly, stepping close enough now that you could see the strain in his face. He was not a rich man. 6 shillings had already been dear. 8 was desperation, pure and bare. The blacksmith's jaw tightened. He spat again, then growled. 9! The word fell heavy on the square like the tolling of a bell. He crossed his arms, daring anyone to go higher. The crowd buzzed, excitement mingled with unease. A woman's voice whispered near the front. Poor lass. She'll not last a year with Cole. Another muttered. Best she'd run. But running was not an option. Not here, not with the halter and Samuel's hand gripping it tight. Your own voice, long stifled, rose in your throat, aching to be heard. Your hands trembled at your sides. Could you speak? Would they even listen? Richard looked at you, his lips parting as though to beg patience, but his purse hung thin at his belt. He had nothing more to offer. Thomas shifted his feet, his youthful eagerness wilting under the blacksmith's glare. And Samuel, drunk on both ale and the prospect of silver, raised his arm high, ready to declare Edmund Cole the victor. You felt it then, a surge of fire, hot and wild, born of years of silence. "I'll not go to him!" you cried out, your voice sharp and cutting through the air like a knife. The crowd fell instantly quiet. "I'll not be sold to Edmund Cole. If I must go, I'll go to Richard Hale, and none other." Gasps rose. A murmur swept through the square. The rules of this grotesque theater did not often allow for a wife's voice, but your defiance carried weight. Some nodded. Others whispered in outrage. Samuel froze, his arms still raised, his drunken smile faltering. The blacksmith's face darkened, his pride wounded in front of half the town. He stepped forward, fists curling. "You dare?" But the crowd shifted uneasily, their murmurs turning against him. An old farmer shouted, "The lass has spoken. You'll not drag her by force, Cole." The air crackled with the possibility of violence. All eyes now turned to Samuel Pike, waiting to see if he would force your silence, or let your words stand. Section 4. Samuel's grip on the rope tightened until his knuckles whitened, his face twisted with indecision. He had expected coin, laughter, perhaps even admiration for ridding himself of a troublesome wife. What he hadn't expected was the crowd to lean toward your side. The blacksmith, Edmund Cole, stood rigid, his thick neck flushing crimson. "She has no say," he snarled, his voice low but audible. "The rope says it all. She's property, and I've bid the highest. 9 shillings, that's more than she's worth." A hush spread. Then, from the rear of the crowd, an elderly weaver raised his cane and struck it against the cobblestones. Crack! "She's worth more than coin, Cole," the old man barked. "And if she won't go to you, then by God, she shouldn't be forced." A ripple of agreement followed. Not universal, but enough. You felt the weight of 50 pairs of eyes turned toward Samuel Pike, each waiting to see whether he would defy the unspoken justice of the square. Samuel licked his lips, his ale-thick tongue darting nervously. His greed wrestled with fear. He had 9 shining shillings within reach, but also a crowd that could turn on him in an instant. He remembered, perhaps, what had happened 2 winters ago in Whitby when a husband tried to force his wife into a sale she refused, how the mob tore his coat to ribbons and ran him into the freezing river. 7 shillings, Richard Hale said quietly, breaking the silence. "And her choice. That's fair." He held out the meager coins in his palm, his voice carrying not with bravado but with steady conviction. The moment teetered. Samuel's eyes darted between the coins, the crowd, and your face. You held his gaze, refusing to look away, though your heart pounded so violently it hurt. Finally, Samuel spat into the frost, muttering, "Take her, then. 7 shillings and her blasted choice." He yanked the rope loose from your neck, the halter falling to the stones with a soft thud. Relief washed over you so suddenly your knees nearly gave way. Richard was at your side in an instant, steadying you with a hand that trembled less than your own. He picked up the rope and flung it into the muck, his jaw hard. The crowd erupted, some clapping, some jeering Cole, some simply laughing at the drama's end. But there was no mistaking it. The square had witnessed, and in their eyes the sale was done. Edmund Cole cursed under his breath, shoving his way out of the throng. His boots struck the stones like hammer blows, leaving a trail of anger in his wake. You watched him go, dread gnawing at the edges of your relief. Men like Cole did not forget humiliation. "Come," Richard murmured. His hand was warm around yours, and for the first time in years, you felt the faint stirrings of safety. Yet beneath it all, you knew the truth. You had traded one master for another. The law saw you not as free but as Richard's possession now. The bells of St. Martin's tolled again, their notes solemn. The crowd began to scatter, already telling the story of what they'd seen in a dozen different versions. You stood in the square, the frost biting your cheeks, your life forever altered by 7 shillings and the fragile mercy of a crowd. Section 5. The crowd thinned until only a few lingered, gossiping as they drifted back to stalls of cheese and bolts of cloth. The square returned to its usual morning rhythm, though the frost seemed sharper, the air heavier. You stood beside Richard Hale, your hand still caught in his as though either of you dared to let go, afraid that if you did the moment might unravel. Samuel Pike was already halfway down the lane toward the tavern, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold. The coins clinked in his pocket, louder than the bells of St. Martin's. You watched him go, that familiar mix of pity and hatred twisting in your chest. Samuel would spend it all by nightfall, you knew his habits too well. By tomorrow morning he would wake broke, his tongue thick with drink, and perhaps regret. But regret never lasted long with Samuel. Richard's voice broke the silence. "Come with me, Eleanor." Your name on his lips sounded softer than you remembered hearing it spoken. He did not tug or command, he simply opened his hand, palm upward, a quiet invitation. You nodded, though your throat felt tight. Each step you took away from the square was like walking out of one life and into another. The streets twisted down toward the river, the familiar smells of tanneries and smoke mingling with damp winter air. Every corner felt new, as though you were seeing Bridworth for the first time without Samuel's shadow looming over you. At last, Richard pushed open the door of his cottage on the edge of town. Inside it was warm, the fire burning low, the smell of bread lingering. You paused just inside the threshold, your fingers brushing the wooden frame as though it might vanish if you didn't steady yourself. Richard removed his cap, running a hand through his graying hair. "I should tell you plain, Eleanor. What happened in the square, it gives us no protection in the law. To them, you're mine now, but not my wife. Not yet. If Samuel changes his mind—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "I know," you whispered. You did know. The halter was gone, but the invisible bonds remained. Still, something stirred in you that you had not felt in years, an ember of choice, however small. Richard studied you, his eyes searching. "If you wish to go, you may. I'll not bind you. Not with rope, not with coin. Not ever." The words startled you more than the jeers of the crowd had. For a moment you could not speak. Samuel's voice had always been iron, commands barked, fists clenched. Richard's voice was something else entirely, gentler, though weighted with care. "I'll stay," you said at last, the words trembling but true. "At least for now." A shadow crossed his face at your hesitation, but he nodded, accepting it. He stoked the fire, set bread on the table, and for the first time in years you sat without fear of an outburst, of a hand striking your cheek for some unseen offense. Yet as you tore the bread, you could not shake the image of Edmund Cole's face, red with fury, his eyes promising vengeance. Somewhere in Bridworth's crooked streets, he was still nursing that wound to his pride. And you knew in your bones, he would not let it rest. Section 6. The days that followed felt strange, as though you were walking in borrowed skin. Richard's cottage was small but warm, and he moved about it with quiet steadiness. He was not given to chatter. His words came measured, deliberate, but there was a gentleness in his silences. When he passed you a cup of broth, he did not slam it on the table as Samuel had. When he left for work at the tannery, he did not demand an accounting of where you'd been, whom you'd spoken to. And yet, though the bruises of your marriage to Samuel faded from your arms, the weight of fear did not. Each time a knock rattled the door, your breath caught, expecting to see Cole's broad frame filling the threshold. Because Edmund Cole had not forgotten. On the third evening after the sale, he sat hunched in the corner of the Stag's Head Tavern, tankard in hand, his eyes narrowed beneath heavy brows. The tavern buzzed with laughter and smoke, but his corner was quiet, his fury a shadow that men avoided. His pride had been bartered away in front of half the town, and worse, a woman had defied him before them all. "She'll rue it," he muttered into his ale. "Her, and that soft-eyed widower." One of his drinking companions, a wiry fellow named Briggs, leaned closer. "Best leave it, Cole." The crowd sided with her. "Don't mean to cross the lot of 'em." Cole's fist slammed the table, rattling the tankards. "She made a fool of me. Spoke out in front of all. And Pike, Sold her for less than a decent horse, while I was ready to pay near double. No man cheats Edmund Cole. Briggs shrugged uneasily, but said no more. Meanwhile, Samuel Pike had indeed drunk away his 7 shillings in 2 nights' time. He lay in the gutter outside the same tavern, his coat stiff with frost, mumbling curses at anyone who passed. Most stepped around him. Some laughed. A few tossed him coppers, which he promptly spent on gin as soon as he could stagger upright. Word of his wife's defiance spread through Bridworth like fire through dry hay. At the well, women whispered about your courage, some with admiration, others with fear. She spoke out, one said in awe. Before the whole square. Another shook her head. She'll pay for it. Mark me. In Richard's cottage you tried to sew by candlelight, though your fingers trembled. The needle pricked your skin, a bead of red rising, but you hardly felt it. Your mind circled endlessly. What had you done? What had you dared? Richard noticed your distraction. He sat across the table, repairing a harness, his broad hands steady. You're safe here, he said quietly, without looking up. But the ember of fear inside you smoldered. Safe, yes, but for how long? For outside, in the taverns and alleyways of Bridworth, Edmund Cole's fury was sharpening into intent. And Samuel Pike, stumbling in his ruin, might yet find reason to sell you again, this time not to the highest bidder, but to the angriest. Section 7. Winter clung to Bridworth with an iron grip. The fields lay bare beneath a pale sky, and smoke from cottage chimneys drifted low and heavy. For most, life went on in its usual rhythm: market days, church bells, the ceaseless grind of work. But for you, each sound beyond Richard's door felt like a warning. On the 7th morning after the sale, a knock rattled the wood. Your breath itched, the thread slipping from your needle. Richard, wiping his hands, moved to the door. When he opened it, a neighbor stood, Mrs. Tolland, a stout woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. I thought you'd best know, she said, glancing past Richard at you. Cole's been asking after her. Says Pike was cheated of his bargain. Says the sale weren't proper. Her voice carried that peculiar mix of warning and relish that gossipers thrived on. Richard's jaw tightened. Tell Cole if he's grievances, he may bring them to me. Not to her. Mrs. Tolland sniffed. Be sure he will. And soon. She gave you one last look, half pity, half curiosity, before turning on her heel. When the door shut, Richard leaned against it, exhaling slowly. He's stirring trouble. Your hands twisted in your lap. He'll not stop. You whispered. I saw it in his eyes that day. He'll not forgive. Richard came to you then, crouching so his eyes met yours. His voice was low, steady, but beneath it lay a current of worry. Eleanor, I can't promise he'll let this rest. But you're not alone now. If Cole comes, he'll have to face me, and the town besides. You saw how they stood with you. You nodded, though your chest remained tight. Crowds were fickle. Today they had sided with you. Tomorrow, if Cole pushed hard enough, they might side with him. Meanwhile, Cole's anger fermented into strategy. At the forge, his hammer struck iron with vicious rhythm, sparks flying like the bile in his gut. He told customers the sale was a sham, that Samuel had been tricked by Hale's soft words and your witch's tongue. He painted himself as the wrong man, cheated out of a fair bargain. One evening at the Stag's Head, he slammed his tankard down and declared, She belongs to Pike still, by law if not by rope. And I'll see her back, or I'll see Hale ruined. Samuel Pike, slumped drunk nearby, lifted his head at that. His eyes were bloodshot, his pockets empty, his pride ragged. Ruined? He mumbled. He's got her. Let him keep her. What's she to me now? Cole leaned close, voice like a hiss. She's silver. She's coin. You sold her cheap, Pike. But there's more to be wrung from her yet, if you've the wit to see it. Samuel blinked slowly, the gears of greed turning even through the fog of drink. And in Richard's cottage, as you lay awake listening to the wind scrape at the shutters, you felt the truth settle heavy in your bones. The halter might be gone, but its shadow still looped around your neck. Section 8. By mid-January the gossip had thickened like smoke in the rafters of Bridworth. Every market day, whispers followed you through the square. When you bent to choose onions at a stall, you felt eyes on your back, voices muttering, "That's her, the one sold for 7 shillings. The one who chose her buyer." Children pointed. Older women drew them close, scolding softly as though your presence alone were dangerous. Some faces showed admiration, secret smiles of women who envied your defiance, but others burned with censure. "Unseemly," hissed a matron with lace at her bonnet. "Unnatural. Next wives will be choosing all their masters if this goes unchallenged." At church, the minister's sermon circled pointedly around obedience and the sanctity of vows. You felt each word pierce like a needle. Though he never named you, the congregation's stolen glances told you exactly whom he meant. Richard held your hand firm during the service, yet afterward he walked stiffly, jaw clenched. "They wag their tongues because they've naught else to do," he muttered. "Let them. We'll outlast their noise." But outside the taverns, Edmund Cole was doing more than talking. He had taken to buying Samuel Pike drink after drink, filling the man's ear with poison. "Hale tricked you," he insisted one fog-soaked night, slamming another tankard into Samuel's hand. 7 shillings? A fool's sum. I'd offered near 10. He stole her from you, and the town laughed at it. But you and me, we can right it." Samuel's bleary eyes blinked slowly. "Right it how?" "Claim her back," Cole urged. "Say the bargain wasn't binding. You're still her lawful husband. The law's with you, Pike. The town may jeer, but law's thicker than jeers." Samuel frowned, the thought worming into his ale-clouded mind. He remembered the rope in his hand, the weight of the crowd's gaze, the moment he'd let her go. He remembered, too, how she'd defied him, how she'd spoken against him before all. His pride stung like an open wound. "She shamed me," he muttered bitterly. Cole's lips curled into a thin smile. "Aye. And Hale made a fool of us both. But we'll have the last laugh." Back at Richard's cottage, you felt the world closing in like tightening walls. The townsfolk's stares, the minister's veiled words, the gossip winding tighter each day, it pressed on your chest until even the small comfort of Richard's hearth felt precarious. One evening, as you set bread to rise, you whispered aloud what had been festering in your thoughts. "They'll come for me." Richard, mending a strap by the fire, looked up sharply. "Let them try," he said. But his hands tightened on the leather, his knuckles whitening. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, and you wondered if it carried Edmund Cole's voice, plotting, promising, waiting. Section 9. Conclusion. The weeks that followed became a waiting game. Every knock at the door, every creak in the night set your pulse racing. Richard did his best to shield you, but the tension showed in him too, his shoulders tight, his voice clipped when neighbors repeated the latest whispers. At last the storm broke. On a grey morning, Edmund Cole strode into the square with Samuel Pike at his side. Samuel's clothes hung ragged, his face hollowed by drink, but his eyes burned with wounded pride. Cole had stoked him well. "She belongs to me still," Samuel shouted before the gathered townsfolk, voice raw. "That sale was no lawful thing. I'll have her back, or Hale will answer for it." The crowd bristled. Some muttered agreement. "Aye, the law said so." Others crossed their arms, unwilling to see you dragged backward into misery. Then Richard stepped forward, calm but unyielding. "You sold her, Pike. We all saw it. And she chose, before God and man alike. The rope was cast aside. Would you bind it back around her neck?" The murmurs swelled. Men and women alike remembered that moment, how your voice had rung clear in the frosty air. The halter had fallen, and with it something in their hearts had shifted. Samuel faltered, his protest crumbling beneath their gaze. Cole snarled, but even he saw the tide turn against him. To push further would mean a fight with the whole town. With a curse, he seized Pike's arm and dragged him away, their footsteps echoing like retreating thunder. Silence lingered in the square. Then the old weaver raised his cane once more, striking it against the stones. Crack! Let it stand, he declared. The lass is where she's chosen, and there's an end to it. A rumble of agreement followed. Slowly, the crowd dispersed, the matter settled not by law but by the rough justice of community. That night, in Richard's cottage, the fire glowed warm. You sat together in quiet, the fear finally loosening its grip. It's done, Richard said softly, though his eyes still watched the shadows beyond the shutter. And you, staring into the flames, felt a strange peace. You had not won freedom, not fully. The law still named you property, tied to whichever man claimed you. But you had carved out something rare, something almost unthinkable in your time, a choice. However fragile, however costly, it was yours. The halter lay somewhere in the muck of the square, trampled and forgotten. Yet in your memory it would remain forever, a symbol of the old world's chains, and of the moment you dared to slip them, if only by a single breath of defiance.